On the 3rd of November, 1967, 1435 ICT, Hill 823 near Jakto, Kon Tum Province, a patrol from the 173rd Airborne Brigade lies pinned under mortar fire, and the radio operator dies, clutching his AN PRC-25. The platoon leader grabs the handset and hears only static. No FAC, no firebase, no extraction. 2 hours later, another RTO arrives with a fresh battery and the network snaps back. Click, squelch. Within 8 minutes, F-4 Phantoms roll in with napalm and the patrol walks out. Every war story celebrates the pilot or the platoon sergeant, but survival belonged to the invisible network. Calories, feet, and radio waves. C-Rations delivered 3,600 kilocalories per day in tropical heat that killed appetites. Jungle boots with their canvas uppers and drainage grommets kept feet dry, while leather boots rotted in 3 weeks. The PRC-25, at 25 pounds with battery, turned isolation into a 10-minute problem if the operator knew the frequencies and the batteries held charge. The myth says firepower and helicopters won firefights, that close air support and medevac defined modern warfare. Doctrine manuals from Macy V in 1967 emphasize air mobility and artillery response times, not the grunt-level logistics that made those responses possible. But a Huey cannot extract a patrol it cannot find, and an F-4 cannot hit a target without a FAC talking to a ground observer with a working radio. Between November 1967 and May 1968, more patrols aborted from immersion-foot and heat exhaustion than from enemy contact in I-Corps. The AN/PRC-25 had a 3 to 5 kilometer range in triple canopy jungle, but relay networks through fire bases extended that to 40 kilometers. C-Rations kept sodium and sugar levels stable when ambient temperatures hit 38 degrees Celsius and men lost 2 liters of sweat per hour. Jungle boots cost $4 per pair and failed after 90 days, but kept soldiers mobile when leather boots caused more casualties than punji stakes. The network was invisible because it worked, until one leg failed and patrols went from alone to lost in minutes. The 3-leg network starts with the AN/PRC-25 radio, standard issue to every infantry platoon and patrol after 1966. Synthesized frequency control allows 920 channels across the 30 to 75 MHz range, letting units avoid jamming and coordinate across battalions. The operator carries 25 pounds, 23 pounds for the radio, 2 pounds for the battery that lasts 24 hours on intermittent use. In open terrain, the PRC-25 reaches 16 kilometers. In triple canopy jungle near Kaisan or Jakto, that drops to 3 kilometers on a good day. So the network stacks relays. The patrol calls a forward air controller, orbiting at 3,000 feet. The FAC calls the firebase calls the tactical operations center, and close air support launches within 8 to 10 minutes if the weather holds. Click, squelch. 2 sounds that confirm the circuit is live and the operator has not walked into a radio shadow or let the battery die. The second leg is C-Rations, packed in olive drab tins and distributed in cases of 12 meals, each meal delivering roughly 1,200 kilocalories. A patrol humping 55 to 70 pounds through jungle burns 4,000 to 5,000 kilocalories per day, so 3 C-Ration meals barely cover the deficit. The meals include a meat and beans can, a bread and dessert can, an accessory packet with cigarettes and instant coffee, and salt tablets because sweat drains sodium faster than kidneys can recycle it. Without those salts, soldiers cramp and collapse from hyponatremia even when canteens are full. The third leg is the jungle boot, introduced in 1966 after immersion-foot sidelined entire companies in the Mekong Delta. The boot uses a canvas and leather upper, a direct molded sole, and 2 brass grommets on each side that drain water within seconds. Leather boots trap moisture, and within 72 hours, The skin softens, cracks and infections spread up the calf. By January 1968, the 1st Marine Division at Khe-Sanh reports that jungle boots cut immersion-foot cases by 80% compared to the old leather design. The network is invisible because no single piece looks critical. C-Rations are just breakfast, boots are just footwear, and the PRC-25 is just a radio. But remove one leg, and the patrol cannot call for help, cannot march to the landing zone, or cannot stay conscious long enough to defend the perimeter. In a war where the front line is everywhere and nowhere, the network is the perimeter, and the perimeter is built from tins, canvas, and transistors. On the 21st of January, 1968, 0615 ICT, Route 9 west of Khe-Sanh Combat Base, Quang Tri Province, a convoy from the 26th Marines pushes through morning fog when mortars bracket the lead trucks. The convoy halts, Marines dismount, and the company radio operator runs forward with his PRC-25, while the handset cord trails across his flak jacket. He drops behind a culvert, extends the antenna, and keys the handset. Click, squelch. Khe-Sanh Tower acknowledges immediately, and within 4 minutes a forward air controller in an O-1 Bird Dog banks over the ridgeline. The FAC spots muzzle flashes 800 meters north and marks the target with a white phosphorus rocket. At 0623 ICT, 2 F-4 Phantoms from Da Nang roll in with 500-pound bombs, and the mortar fire stops. Total time from first round to last bomb, 8 minutes because the radio worked and the operator knew the frequency. LCPL. Michael O'Hara, RTO, Echo Company, 226 Marines, 21st January, 1968. USMC Oral History, HD 288. I kept that battery fresh, every night. You let it die, you die. Simple. But the operator also carries 3 C-ration meals in his pack. And by 0800 ICT, he has burned through 1 meal, just humping the radio up Route 9's grade. The heat hits 32 degrees Celsius by mid-morning, and without the salt tablets in the accessory pack, his hands start cramping around the handset. He eats a 2nd meal at the convoy halt, ham and lima beans, which everyone hates, but which deliver fats and sodium, and the cramps fade. By 1400 ICT, the convoy reaches Khe-Sanh perimeter, and the operator's boots are soaked from crossing a stream, but the drainage grommets let the water out within 10 minutes. Leather boots would still be wet at nightfall, and by morning the skin would soften and crack. The RTO logs 11 kilometers that day, calls in 3 fire missions, and never loses contact with the base because the radio, the rations, and the boots all held up. But the network reveals its fragility the next day when another convoy loses an RTO to a sniper round before he can pass the handset. The backup operator grabs the radio, but does not know the fire support frequency, and the convoy takes 40 minutes to re-establish contact with the FAC. By then, the mortars have displaced, and the airstrike hits empty jungle. The difference between 8 minutes and 40 minutes is the difference between suppression and casualties. Commandant David E. Lowndes, CO, 26th Marines, February 1968. USMC Command. Chronology. Every company needs 3 trained RTOs. One gets hit, the next man picks up the handset and keeps the network alive. But training takes time, and replacements arrive at Khe-Sanh with 2 weeks of radio school and no jungle experience. So the network depends not just on the equipment, but on the operator's knowledge of frequencies, call signs, and authentication codes. At Khe-Sanh in January and February 1968, the 26th Marines burn through 600 PRC-25 batteries per week because every patrol, every listening post, and every company command post runs a radio 24 hours a day. The batteries arrive by C-130 when the weather clears, and when the weather socks in, patrols ration their radio time and hope the circuit stays live. C-Rations arrive on the same flights, 12,000 cases in January alone, because the 6,000 Marines at Khe Sanh cannot grow food or forage in a siege perimeter. Jungle boots arrive in bulk shipments from Okinawa, but the supply system prioritizes ammunition and medical supplies, so some companies rotate soldiers out of the line when their boots disintegrate. The invisible network becomes visible only when one leg fails, and at Khe Sanh in early 1968, that happens more often than the official reports admit. Not perfect logistics, but functional logistics, and functional is enough when the alternative is silent radios, empty stomachs, and immobile feet. On the Isaigzhua, 31st of January, 1968, 0320 ICT, the citadel in Hue, Thua Thien Province, erupts in automatic weapons fire as People's Army of Vietnam and National Liberation Front units seize the old imperial capital. American and IRVN forces fall back to isolated strong points, and the city fragments into 100 small battles where radios are the only link to artillery and air support. A Marine Rifle Company from the 1st Battalion, 5th Marines enters the Southern District on the 1st of February and loses contact with battalion headquarters within 30 minutes because the stone walls block radio signals. The company commander orders his RTOs to relay through a forward air controller circling above the smoke, and the FAC becomes the central node in a network that connects 10 isolated units. Each RTO carries a PRC-25 with a fresh battery, but the batteries drain faster in urban combat because the walls force operators to boost transmission power. By the 4th of February, the company is rationing radio time, 2-minute check-ins every hour instead of continuous contact, because resupply helicopters cannot land in the streets. Captain James R. McCarthy, CO Alpha Company, 15 Marines, 4th February 1968. USMC after action. Report, we had 3 RTOs and 6 spare batteries. When the last battery died, we were deaf and mute in a city full of people trying to kill us. But the radios are useless if the operators cannot stay on their feet, and by the 6th of February, the company has been fighting for 5 days on 2 C-ration meals per day. The normal load is 3 meals per day, 3,600 kilocalories, but resupply drops miss the company position twice, and the Marines stretch their rations by skipping breakfast. At 1,200 kilocalories per meal, 2 meals deliver 2,400 kilocalories, which is barely half the energy a Marine burns humping 60 pounds of gear through rubble and fighting house to house. The C-Rations also contain salt tablets, and those tablets become critical when temperatures inside the stone buildings hit 35 degrees Celsius, and men lose liters of sweat. Without the salt, hands shake, vision tunnels, and Marines collapse even when water is available. The accessory pack also includes instant coffee, and the caffeine keeps exhausted soldiers alert during night watches when the PAVN probe the perimeter. Jungle boots matter less in the city because the streets are paved, but when the company crosses the Perfume River on the 10th of February, the boots drain immediately and soldiers stay mobile. Leather boots would trap water and river mud, and within a day the skin would soften and infections would spread. The company fights in Hue for 26 days, and the RTOs log over 300 radio transmissions, calls for fire support, medevac requests, resupply coordinates, and the network holds because the batteries last just long enough and the rations keep the operators conscious. LCPL, Thomas A. Burns, RTO Alpha Company, 15 Marines, 12th February, 1968. Personal interview, 1985. The hardest part wasn't the shooting. It was staying awake and coherent when you hadn't eaten a full meal in 3 days and the radio felt like it weighed 50 pounds. The company loses 6 RTOs in Hue, 3 killed, 3 wounded, but the survivors pass the handset forward and the network never breaks for more than 10 minutes. Every time a radio goes silent, another operator moves up with a spare PRC-25 and the circuit snaps back. By the time the company secures its sector on the 24th of February, The Marines have consumed 780 C-ration meals, worn through 90 pairs of jungle boots, and drained 200 PRC-25 batteries. The numbers are mundane, but the network is not. It is the difference between isolated chaos and coordinated fire support. In a city where every street corner is a potential ambush, the invisible network turns small units into nodes in a larger system. Without the radios, the company fights alone. Without the rations, the operators cannot think clearly. Without the boots, mobility collapses. The PAVN and NLF controlled the streets, but never controlled the network, and the network is what allowed the Marines to call in artillery, napalm, and reinforcements until the city fell back into American and ARVN hands. Not superior tactics, but superior logistics. And logistics is what turned a chaotic urban fight into a grinding, winnable battle. On the 8th of February, 1968, 1140 ICT, a reconnaissance patrol from the 1st Battalion, 9th Marines walks into an ambush 3 kilometers north of Route 9 in the Quezon sector. The point man drops, and the patrol dives into a creek bed while machine gun fire rips through the canopy overhead. The RTO, a lance corporal carrying a PRC-25 and 3 C-ration meals, crawls behind a fallen tree and keys the handset. Static. He extends the antenna and tries again. Click, squelch. The circuit snaps open, and the patrol leader shouts coordinates into the handset while mortars start falling 50 meters downslope. At 11:43 ICT, a forward air controller in an O2 Ski Master picks up the call and redirects 2 F-4 Phantoms inbound from Da Nang. At 11:51 ICT, 11 minutes after the first shot, the Phantoms roll in with 500-pound bombs and the machine gun fire stops. The patrol breaks contact and moves south toward Route 9, and the RTO stays on the net with the FAC until the patrol crosses into friendly lines at 13:20 ICT. Total distance: 4 kilometers through jungle so thick the patrol averages 1 kilometer per hour. Sergeant Gary L. Morrison, Patrol Leader, 1 to 9 Marines. 10th February, 1968. USMC Patrol Report. The RTO kept that antenna up and the circuit live for 90 minutes straight. The battery lasted because he turned off the radio between check-ins and conserved power. But the operator also burns 1,500 kilocalories humping the radio through jungle, and by 1,400 ICT, he eats his second C-ration meal, beef stew and crackers, to keep his energy up. The heat is relentless, 34 degrees Celsius under the canopy, and the accessory pack's salt tablets prevent the hand cramps that would make him drop the handset. His jungle boots are soaked from the creek crossing, but the drainage grommets let the water out and his feet stay mobile. Leather boots would have trapped the water, and by nightfall the skin would have softened and started to crack. The patrol reaches Route 9 and boards trucks back to Quezon, and the RTO logs 8 hours on patrol, 2 fire missions, and 0 radio failures. The network held because all 3 legs, radio, rations, boots, functioned without a single break. But the same day, another patrol from the 3rd Battalion, 26th Marines, loses contact with its fire base after the RTO's battery dies during a firefight. The patrol tries to switch to the backup radio, but the backup's antenna was damaged during the insertion helicopter ride, and the signal will not reach beyond 2 kilometers. The patrol spends 4 hours walking south in radio silence, and by the time they reach the fire base, 2 Marines have collapsed from heat exhaustion because they skipped lunch to save weight and ran out of salt tablets. The difference between the 2 patrols is maintenance and discipline. One RTO charged his battery every night and carried 3 meals. The other did not. Major George E.T. Bud Day, F-Ace, 31st Tactical Fighter Wing, March 1968, USAF Oral History, K239, Tom, Zo 512, 1699. Half the ground teams I worked with had trained RTOs who knew the nets and kept their gear up. The other half called me with dead batteries and garbled coordinates, and I couldn't help them. The invisible network depends on hundreds of small decisions: charging batteries, eating meals, draining boots, and those decisions compound over days and weeks. A patrol that skips maintenance for one day loses contact for 10 minutes. A patrol that skips maintenance for a week loses contact permanently. At Khe-Sanh, between January and April 1968, the 26th Marines log 47 patrols that abort due to radio failure, heat exhaustion, or immersion-foot. Those are 47 patrols that could not call for fire support, could not navigate back to base, or could not walk the final kilometer. The official after-action reports attribute the aborts to equipment malfunction or environmental factors, but the real cause is simpler. The network failed because one leg broke. Not enemy action, but entropy. And entropy kills just as efficiently as bullets when the radio dies, the stomach empties, or the feet blister. On the 12th of May, 1968, 1600, ICT, a combined patrol of U.S. Marines and ARVN regional forces, moves through rice paddies 2 kilometers west of Jong Ha, Quang Tri Province. The patrol includes an Australian Army Training Team Vietnam warrant officer acting as advisor, and he carries his own PRC-25 to maintain contact with the ARVN district headquarters. The patrol spots movement near a tree line, and the advisor calls in the sighting to the ARVN command post, which relays the coordinates to a Marine artillery battery at Jong Ha Combat Base. At 1608 ICT, 105mm howitzer rounds impact 400 meters west of the patrol, and the movement stops. The network functions because the advisor's radio bridges 2 separate command structures, U.S. Marine and ARVN, and the artillery battery accepts fire missions from either net. WO2RJ, Bob Kearney, AAT-TV advisor, Quang Tri Province, 15th May 1968. Australian War Memorial, AWM 95, 7th to 8:48. The radio was the only reason the ARVN trusted us. We could call in American artillery and air support, and that made us valuable. Without the radio, we were just another foreigner in their rice paddies. But the advisor also carries 6 C-Ration meals because ARVN patrols do not always carry enough food for multi-day operations, and he shares his rations with the ARVN squad leader when the patrol extends into a second day. The C-Rations deliver fats and proteins that the ARVN rice-based rations lack, and the accessory pack's instant coffee becomes a bargaining chip during planning sessions. The advisor's jungle boots also draw attention. ARVN soldiers still wear leather boots in mid-1968, and immersion-foot remains a chronic problem in the Delta regions. The advisor demonstrates the drainage grommets to the ARVN platoon leader, and within a month, the district requests 200 pairs of jungle boots from U.S. supply channels. The network extends beyond U.S. units and becomes a shared system wherever American advisors operate, and that system depends on equipment compatibility and shared frequencies. The PRC-25's 920 channels allow U.S. and ARVN units to coordinate without switching radios, and the standardized C-Ration cans fit into Vietnamese rucksacks just as easily as American packs. On the 13th of May, the patrol crosses a canal and the advisor's boots drain within seconds, while the ARVN soldiers stop to empty water from their leather boots. The 10-minute delay creates a gap in the patrol line, and the advisor uses the time to call in a situation report to the district headquarters. The radio works because the battery is fresh. The rations work because the advisor carries extra meals, and the boots work because the design prioritizes drainage over durability. The patrol returns to Jong Ha on the 14th of May after 48 hours in the field, and the advisor logs 22 radio transmissions, 5 shared, C-Ration meals, and 0 foot injuries. The ARVN platoon leader requests more joint patrols, because the American advisor brings firepower and logistics that ARVN units cannot access on their own. Tain Nguyen Van Than, ARVN Regional Forces, 14th May 1968. VNCA Oral History. RF-127. The American radio reached farther than ours, and his food lasted longer. We learned to bring our own batteries and rations, but the boots, we wanted those boots. The invisible network becomes visible when it crosses cultural and organizational boundaries, and at Zhongha in mid-1968, that boundary is porous. U.S. advisors carry spare batteries and rations specifically to share with ARVN counterparts, and the ARVN district headquarters stocks PRC-25 repair parts because the radio is now standard across both armies. The jungle boot takes longer to proliferate. ARVN supply channels are slower and less reliable. But by late 1968, most ARVN units in I Corps have transitioned to canvas and leather designs modeled on the U.S. boot. The network spreads because it works, and it works because the equipment is simple, interoperable, and designed for the specific environment. Not advanced technology, but appropriate technology. Radios that work in humidity, rations that survive tropical heat, and boots that drain faster than water accumulates. On the 2nd of July, 1967, 2215 ICT, a listening post from the 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines sits in a shallow crater 800 meters north of Con Thien, Quang Tri Province. The 4 Marines rotate watch every 2 hours, and the RTO keeps the PRC-25 handset clipped to his flak jacket so he can call in contact reports without fumbling in the dark. At 2340 ICT, mortar rounds impact 200 meters south, and the RTO keys the handset. Con Thien Tower acknowledges, and the listening post relays the bearing and estimated range of the mortar impacts. At 2344 ICT, Marine artillery at Con Thien fires counter-battery rounds based on the listening post's report, and the enemy mortars go silent. Total response time, 4 minutes, because the radio worked and the operator transmitted clean coordinates. But the listening post also sits in the crater for 8 hours, and the Marines rotate through their C-ration meals to stay alert. Each Marine carries 2 meals, one for the evening, one for the morning, and the accessory pack's instant coffee keeps them awake during the midnight to 0400 watch. The crater is dry, so the jungle boots do not get tested, but the Marines know that leather boots would have rotted within a week in the Con Thien mud. LCPL, David R. Jenkins, RTO, Kilo Company, 3 to 9 Marines. 5th July, 1967. USMC Patrol Report. The listening post was boring until it wasn't. The radio turned boredom into survival because we could call for help the second we heard movement. But listening posts fail when RTOs fall asleep or when batteries die during the night, and at Con Thien in July 1967, the battalion loses contact with 2 listening posts in a single week. One post's RTO falls asleep after skipping dinner to save weight, and the post misses a PAVN probe that penetrates the perimeter before dawn. The other post's battery dies at 0200 ICT, and the Marines spend 4 hours in radio silence before walking back to Con Thien at first light. The official reports list both incidents as communication failures, but the real failure is discipline. One RTO did not eat, the other did not charge his battery. The invisible network depends on routine. Eat 3 meals, charge the battery every night, drain the boots after every stream crossing. Skip 1 step and the network weakens. Skip 2 steps and it breaks. At Con Thien, the 3rd Battalion institutes mandatory radio checks every 30 minutes for all listening posts, and RTOs carry spare batteries clipped to their web gear. The battalion also enforces a 3-meal minimum for all patrols and listening posts, and squad leaders inspect C-ration loads before every mission. The changes sound trivial, but they cut communication failures by 60% between July and September 1967. The network stabilizes because the battalion treats logistics as seriously as tactics, and that shift transforms isolated listening posts into early warning nodes. Captar William D. Parker, CO, Kilo Company, 3 9 Marines, August 1967. USMC Command. Chronology. We lost more patrols to dead batteries and empty stomachs than to enemy fire. Fix the logistics, and the tactics fix themselves. The jungle boots also become mandatory issue at Con Thien after the battalion surgeon reports a 40% increase in immersion-foot cases during the July monsoon. Leather boots disintegrate in the mud, and Marines who rotate through the perimeter trenches stand in ankle-deep water for hours at a time. The jungle boots drain immediately, and the canvas uppers dry within 30 minutes, so Marines can walk patrols the next day without crippling foot pain. The battalion orders 1,200 pairs of jungle boots in August, and by September, immersion-foot cases drop by 75%. The network's third leg, mobility, stabilizes because the boots keep feet functional, and functional feet mean Marines can walk patrols, man listening posts, and react to enemy probes. Con Thien never falls, not because the Marines are better shooters, but because the logistics network keeps them fed, mobile, and connected to fire support. The Piavin artillery pounds the base for months, but the Marines call in counter-battery fire every time because the radios work, the RTOs stay conscious, and the listening posts stay operational. Not heroism, but maintenance. And maintenance is what turned Con Thien from an isolated outpost into a fortress that the PRC-25 could not crack. On the 18th of March, 1968, 0930 ICT, a Marine reconnaissance team from the 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion inserts by helicopter into jungle 12 kilometers southwest of Khe Sanh. The 6-man team carries 1 PRC-25, 18 C-ration meals, and 6 pairs of jungle boots, and their mission is a 4-day surveillance patrol along a suspected PRVN supply route. The team moves 500 meters from the landing zone and establishes a hide site in dense undergrowth where they can observe a trail junction. At 1100 ICT, the team leader radios a situation report to the Reconnaissance Operations Center at Khe Sanh, and the circuit is clear. At 1430 ICT, the team spots a PAVN squad moving south on the trail, and the RTO whispers coordinates into the handset while the team remains concealed. The Reconnaissance Operations Center relays the sighting to the Regimental Fire Support Coordination Center, and at 1438 ICT, Marine artillery fires 6 rounds onto the trail junction. The PAVN scatter, and the reconnaissance team remains hidden because the radio allows them to call in fires without exposing their position. The network turns a 6-man team into a force multiplier because the team sees, reports, and directs artillery without ever firing a shot. Sergeant Michael P. Cordova, Team Leader, 3rd Recon Be-In. 22nd March, 1968. USMC debrief. The radio was our weapon. We never wanted to shoot because that gave away our position. The radio let us kill from a distance. But the team also rations their C-rations carefully. 3 meals per day per man means 18 meals total, and the team cannot afford to run out before the extraction helicopter arrives on day 4. Reconnaissance patrols burn 5,000 kilocalories per day because they carry 70 pounds of gear and move slowly through thick jungle, so 3 C-ration meals barely cover the deficit. The team eats their meals cold to avoid smoke or smell that might compromise their position, and the accessory pack's salt tablets become critical when the temperature hits 36 degrees Celsius on day 2. On day 3, the team crosses a stream, and the jungle boots drain within minutes, but one Marine's boots have worn through at the toe and water seeps in continuously. The team leader inspects the boot and finds that the canvas has torn after 60 days of use, and the Marine wraps duct tape around the toe to keep water out. The boot holds for the rest of the patrol, but the Marine walks with a limp by day 4 because the wet interior has rubbed his skin raw. The team extracts on the 21st of March without enemy contact, and the RTO logs 32 radio transmissions, 3 fire missions, and 0 communication failures. The network held because the radio worked, the rations lasted, and the boots stayed functional. But the margin was thin. One torn boot, one dead battery, or one missed meal could have forced the team to abort early or lose contact with the operations center. L.C. Pelba. Anthony J. Martinez, RTO, Team 23, 3rd Recon BN, 22nd March, 1968. Personal letter. We lived on that radio. I charged the battery every night, kept the handset dry, and checked the frick every hour. If the radio died, we were just 6 guys alone in the jungle with no way out. Reconnaissance patrols push the network to its limits because they operate far from friendly lines and rely entirely on the radio for fire support and extraction. A rifle company can survive a radio failure for an hour because they are close to their fire base. A reconnaissance team cannot survive 10 minutes. The 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion logs 127 patrols between January and May 1968, and 11 patrols abort due to equipment failure. 9 radio failures, 2 cases of severe immersion-foot. The radio failures trace back to dead batteries or damaged antennas, and the immersion-foot cases trace back to boots that wore out before resupply arrived. The battalion tightens its pre-mission inspections and mandates that every team carry 2 spare PRC-25 batteries and inspect their boots before insertion. The changes cut aborts by half, and by June 1968, the battalion's patrol completion rate climbs to 94%. The invisible network becomes visible in reconnaissance work because the margin for error is 0, and every radio call, every meal, and every drainage grommet matters. The PAVN never saw the reconnaissance teams, but the teams saw the PAVN and directed artillery fires that disrupted supply routes and warned of impending attacks. The network turned invisibility into lethality, and lethality depended on radios that worked, stomachs that stayed full, and feet that stayed dry. Not courage, but logistics. And logistics is what made reconnaissance work possible in a jungle where isolation is the default and survival depends on a network that the enemy never sees. The invisible network, radio, rations, boots, turns individuals into a system, and the system survives when the network holds. But the network is fragile. A dead battery, a skipped meal, a torn boot, and the system fractures. Between November 1967 and May 1968, more patrols in I Corps abort from equipment failure than from enemy contact. The network is invisible because it works, and it works because hundreds of RTOs, supply clerks, and squad leaders maintain it every single day. The sound that confirms the network is alive, and the patrol is not alone. The PRC-25, C-Rations, and jungle boots form a system, but the system only functions when all 3 legs work simultaneously. Between 1966 and 1972, the U.S. military delivers over 100,000 PRC-25 radios to Southeast Asia, and the radio becomes the standard for infantry, artillery, and aviation units across all services. The PRC-25's 920-channel capability allows units to segregate command nets, fire support nets, and administrative nets without switching radios, and that flexibility prevents jamming and eavesdropping. But the radio is useless without batteries, and the military ships 12 million BA-386 batteries to Vietnam during the same period, enough to power every radio for 24 hours every 2 days. The logistics chain stretches from factories in Pennsylvania to supply depots in Okinawa to forward bases in Quang Tri and Kon Tum, and the chain breaks whenever shipping delays, monsoon floods, or enemy mortars hit the depots. At Khe Sanh in February 1968, the 26th Marines ration batteries when C-130 flights cannot land for 3 days, and patrols reduce radio check-ins from hourly to every 2 hours. The network weakens but does not break because RTOs conserve power and call only when necessary, and that discipline stretches the supply just long enough for the weather to clear. C-Rations follow the same logistic chain. 12 meal cases packed in cardboard, shipped in 40-foot containers, and distributed by helicopter or truck to company supply points. Between 1966 and 1972, the military delivers over 500 million C-ration meals to Vietnam, an average of 750,000 meals per day, for the peak troop strength of 543,000 in 1969. The rations are nutritionally adequate but monotonous. Soldiers eat the same 12 menus in rotation for months, and many units supplement with local food or care packages from home. But the C-rations deliver reliable calories, fats, and salts in a package that survives tropical heat and humidity without refrigeration. And that reliability is what keeps soldiers functional in the field. At Hue in February 1968, isolated marine companies survive on 2 meals per day because the resupply helicopters cannot land, and those 2 meals prevent mass heat casualties even when water is scarce. The rations are not perfect. Soldiers complain about the taste, the weight, and the monotony. But they are functional, and functional is enough. Jungle boots follow a different trajectory. The boot is introduced in 1966, but production lags behind demand until 1968. Early jungle boots wear out after 60 to 90 days, and supply clerks struggle to keep pace with replacement requests because soldiers need new boots faster than factories can ship them. By 1969, the military contracts with multiple manufacturers and production climbs to over 1 million pairs per year, enough to issue 2 pairs per soldier per year. The boot design stabilizes around the canvas and leather upper, the direct molded sole, and the brass drainage grommets, and that design becomes standard not just for the U.S. military, but for ARVN forces and allied units. The Australian Army adopts a similar boot in 1968, and by 1970, most infantry units in I Corps wear some variant of the jungle boot. The network spreads because the design works, and the design works because it prioritizes drainage and ventilation over durability and appearance. Leather boots look better and last longer in garrison, but jungle boots keep feet dry and mobile in the field, and the field is where the war is fought. The network's greatest vulnerability is synchronization. If the radios work but the rations run out, patrols abort. If the rations arrive but the boots wear out, patrols cannot walk. If the boots hold but the batteries die, patrols lose contact. Between January and May 1968, the 1st Marine Division logs 89 patrol aborts due to equipment failure, and the failures cluster around 3 causes: dead batteries, insufficient rations, and immersion-foot. The division responds by instituting pre-mission inspections, mandatory battery checks, and ration minimums, and the abort rate drops by 50% between June and December 1968. The network stabilizes not through better equipment, but through better discipline, and discipline means treating the radio, the rations, and the boots as mission-critical, rather than incidental. At the tactical level, the network is invisible. No one writes after-action reports about charged batteries or full stomachs. At the operational level, the network is everything. It enables patrols to call for fire support, medevac, and resupply, and those calls turn small units into nodes in a larger system that delivers overwhelming firepower. The PAVN and NLF fight without a comparable network because they lack the helicopters, radios, and supply chains that make the American system work. PAVN soldiers carry rice and dried fish, leather boots or sandals, and Chinese-made radios with limited range and battery life. The PAVN network functions through discipline and endurance. Soldiers carry weeks of food, march through the night, and cache supplies in jungle bases that American patrols rarely find. But the PAVN cannot call in artillery within 8 minutes, cannot medevac wounded within 30 minutes, and cannot resupply forward units by helicopter when ground routes are cut. The American network is faster, more responsive, and more lethal, But it is also more fragile because it depends on a logistics chain that stretches 10,000 kilometers from factories in the United States to patrols in the jungle. When the chain holds, the network is invisible. When the chain breaks, the network collapses and patrols revert to isolation. Click, squelch. The sound of the network functioning, the sound that means a patrol is connected to artillery, air support, and medivac. The sound that means survival is a logistics problem, and the logistics are working. The invisible network survives the war because it solves the fundamental problem of small unit operations. How do you keep isolated patrols alive and effective when the front line is everywhere and nowhere? The answer is not superior firepower or better training, though both help, but a logistics network that delivers calories, mobility, and communication to every patrol, every day. The ANPRC-25 remains in service until 1976, when it is replaced by the ANPRC-77, which uses the same form factor, battery, and frequency range. The PRC-25's design becomes the template for tactical radios for the next 20 years, and the emphasis on multi-channel capability, portable power, and durability defines military communications for a generation. C-Rations remain standard until 1981, when they are replaced by the meal, ready-to-eat, or MRE, which uses retort pouches instead of cans. The MRE delivers the same 1,200 kilocalories per meal in a lighter package. But the basic concept, shelf-stable, complete meals designed for field use, remains unchanged. Jungle boots evolve into the hot weather combat boot in the 1980s, which retains the canvas upper and drainage vents, but improves the sole design for better traction. The boot remains standard issue for tropical and desert operations, and soldiers deploying to Iraq and Afghanistan in the 2000s wear boots that trace their lineage directly to the 1966 jungle boot. The network does not end with the Vietnam War. It becomes doctrine. The lessons of Khe Sanh, Hue, and Con Thien inform logistics planning for every subsequent conflict, and the emphasis on batteries, rations, and boots becomes embedded in pre-deployment checklists and supply planning. Modern infantry squads carry the same 3 legs: radios, rations, boots, but the technology improves. Digital radios with encrypted channels, flameless ration heaters, boots with Gore-Tex liners. The network is no longer invisible because commanders now recognize that logistics is not a support function, but a combat multiplier. At Khe Sanh in 1968, the network held because RTOs charged their batteries, soldiers ate their meals, and boots drained water faster than feet could rot. The network was invisible because it worked, and it worked because hundreds of people, supply clerks, helicopter pilots, factory workers, squad leaders, maintained it every day. The paradox of the invisible network is that it only becomes visible when it fails, and in I Corps between 1967 and 1968, it failed just rarely enough to prove its value. Not perfect logistics, but functional logistics, and functional logistics is what allowed American and Allied forces to operate in an environment where isolation was the default and connection was the exception. The radio, the rations, and the boots, 3 mundane pieces of equipment that formed a network, and the network turned isolation into survival. Wars are not won by the best shooters or the bravest soldiers, but by the logistics networks that keep those soldiers fed, mobile, and connected. The ANPRC-25, C-Rations, and Jungle Boots formed a 3-leg survival system that turned isolated patrols into nodes in a larger network of fire support, medivac, and resupply. When one leg failed, dead battery, empty stomach, blistered feet, the network fractured and patrols reverted to isolation. The invisible network was invisible because it worked, and it worked because soldiers treated logistics as seriously as tactics. Small gear wins. Survival is a logistics problem.